Hello, everyone. My name is Zach, and this is Science Explosion at Hudson Public Library. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the last Science Explosion of the year before we jump into the summer library program. So I am glad that you are joining me. All right, so we're going to be making candy today. I know I've made candy a few times on this show, but I just think it's so much fun and there's so much science behind it that we can learn. So if you want to follow along with me today, you'll need a few ingredients. All right, first up, as with most kinds of candy, you're going to need some sugar. So just regular granulated sugar is what you'll need here. You're going to need some baking soda. So does anybody remember the scientific name for baking soda? It is sodium bicarbonate. And then you're going to need some corn syrup. So this recipe specifically calls for light corn syrup, and that is what we have here. I would think that heavier corn syrup would work just fine, but honestly, most of the corn syrup that you find in the stores now is going to be light corn syrup anyway. Because everybody's so scared of high fructose corn syrup. All right, then you just need a couple things to measure with. I've got a measuring cup here, and then a teaspoon measuring thing. I think that said, yes, teaspoons. It's always good to double check that. Now remember, if you don't happen to have any teaspoon or tablespoon measuring things, remember that those are based off measurements of actual teaspoons, like the spoons you use for stirring tea, and tablespoons like the spoons that are on your table. So if you happen to have a spoon that's about the right size for that, you could also use that. But we have one of these, so I might as well use it. Then you're going to need a heat source. So I've got my trusty hot pad right here. If you've got a stove, that'll work great. You could even try this over a campfire, but when you're making candy, you need to have it be pretty precise. So it'd be a little hard to do that over a fire, but you are welcome to try. All right, then you need something to put your candy on when you're done. A smaller one than this would have actually been better, but I think we can make this work. I've got this large pan here. You need something to stir it with, and then if you have one, a thermometer. This is a candy/meat thermometer, and it will make this a lot easier. Candy making is a lot more precise than a lot of other cooking. So if you have this, it's going to make your life a lot easier. I think you can still do this without one, but it'll be a little more difficult. So, all right, that's enough of me talking about this. Let us get started. So what do we need? So we've got our baking sheet right here. If you want, you could line that with, it says to line it with parchment paper. I don't really feel like that's necessary. It might make your cleanup a little easier, but it just seems like a waste to me. So I'm going to skip that. You could also line it with oil, but I think what we've got here, it shouldn't stick too bad. I might be wrong on that. We'll see. But I'm the one who's going to have to clean it after this anyway, so that's fine. All right, so we are going to turn our heat on to medium here, and then we're going to get right into making this. We'll talk a little bit about the science of it as we go along. All right, so we are going to, oh, and I will want another container ready here. So we're going to measure our baking soda out to begin with, just so that we have it ready, because we're going to want to have it pretty quickly, and we don't want to have to spend a lot of time measuring it out. So you're going to want 2.5 teaspoons of your baking soda. So I've got a 1 teaspoon thing here, so that's 1, that's 2.5. All right, so we just have that set aside and ready. So The baking soda is the secret ingredient in this. You don't put baking soda in a lot of candies, but this one we will, and for a very special reason. All right, so now we're going to get the rest of the stuff. So what do we need? So we need 1 cup of our sugar. So let's get that out. Perfect. That's 1 cup of sugar. And we're going to pour that into here. All right. And then as soon as you get that, you're going to want to work a little bit quickly on this. You're going to want to do 1/3 cup of corn syrup. Look at that flow out of there. Chug, 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 chug. There we go. That's 1/3 cup. All right, and then you need another 1/3 cup of water, which is right behind the computer right here. So you can hear me, but you can't see me. So I just filled this another 1/3 cup. All right, and then we're going to dump this in. And then we're going to stir. All right, so make sure that you're only cooking this on medium heat. It'll go faster if you go higher, but it's not going to be nearly as good. You're going to ruin the texture of your candy. All right, so what we're doing now is we are going to stir this until the sugar is dissolved. So you don't want to feel the little grains like they have. You want it to be just a solid thing, and it's going to come to a boil. So that's why I say you could get this to a boil a lot quicker if you have it over high heat, but it's not going to turn out nearly as well. So we're just going to stir that, and while we are stirring that, let's talk a little bit about what our ingredients are so far. So water, that's pretty simple. So anybody know the scientific name for water? It is dihydrogen monoxide. Good job if you knew that. So what that basically just means is 2 oxygens and, 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen in every atom. All right, and then the other 2 things are just sugars. So corn syrup is basically a liquid form of sugar, and you can basically just call this sugar because, let's see, in a serving of this, there's 2 tablespoons, and that's 10 grams of sugar. That's a lot of sugar. This is granulated sugar, and I would be willing to bet dollars to donuts that this comes from one place, and if it doesn't come from that, then I could tell you where else it could come from. So a lot of sugar is going to come from sugar cane, but there are other places that you can get sugar too. So sugar is pretty much always going to come from a plant-based source. There is one big exception to that, and it's still kind of plants that make that. But so sugar cane is going to be something that it grows in stalks. It almost looks like a big old grass, and it's just full of sugar. But another big place that we get sugar, especially here in the US, is also from beets. So they are sugar beets. So those are also full of sugar, and you process them down to get the sugar out of them. But we here in Iowa grow our own source of that sugar, and that is where our corn syrup comes in. So corn syrup is a liquid form of sugar here. So basically, when you hear any time somebody says syrup, Basically what it is it's a mixture of sugar with a few other ingredients in it. That's why corn syrup has definitely a different taste than just the plain sugar, although it's a pretty mild taste. So honestly, you can use corn syrup in a lot of sugar-based recipes. All right, so sugar cane, sugar beets, and corn are all great sources of sugar. So if you've ever had sweet corn, you might have noticed there is a lot of sweetness in corn. But what else? So I said that the main ways that we get sugar usually comes from plants. Oh, also you can get, I believe, rice-based sugar. That's not nearly as common, but you can. But the big exception to sugars, there's one that's made by animals, and that is honey. Oh, sorry, I forgot there's also agave. Agave is also a big sweetener. That one's also from a plant. That one's very similar to honey, but honey is the one bees make honey. So specifically honeybees. So here's a big surprise, I bet, to a lot of people is that, did you know that most bees don't actually make honey? It's true. So only honeybees make honey. Most of the other kinds of bees that you see flying around, like carpenter bees, bumblebees, sweat bees, all the other kinds that I can't think of the names of right now, those do not make honey, but honeybees do. So even though we think about bees and honeys being, honey and bees being the same thing, not all bees do make honey, and the majority of them don't. All right, we're getting closer here. We got to keep stirring it. So, talked a little bit about sugar before because I think sugar is honestly really interesting. Sugar lights up your brain when you eat it. If you take a scan of your brain that shows the activity, sugar tends to make it light up quite a bit because sugar, back before we had such easy access to food that we do now, was pretty hard to come by. So you might be surprised because sugar is absolutely everywhere in what's called a standard American diet. But it used to be sugar was pretty hard to come by. It was a luxury, especially processed sugar like this. This thing right here, this bag of sugar, even though I can just go to the store and buy it for a few dollars, back in, let's see, Elizabethan England, that would have been enough that only royalty could have had that amount of sugar. It was very expensive. All right, so your dentist is also going to tell you that sugar is not good for you. It rots your teeth. And I'm not going to argue with your dentist there. That is very much true. So it's not actually the sugar itself that hurts your teeth. So you could rub sugar on your teeth all day and it's not going to do anything to them except for the fact that there are things that live inside your mouth. So yes, I'm going back to this. There is microscopic organisms all over the place. You just got to get used to most of them. Most of them are neutral, some of them are good, and just a few of them are harmful to you. But there's one that there are a few that live inside your mouth and they eat sugar because lots of things like to eat sugar. Sugar is packed with energy. That's actually the big reason why people worry about having too much sugar, is because it's so packed with energy that it can make you gain weight, which used to be a great thing when, like I said, food was scarce, but that's not really the case anymore. All right, we're getting there. This is almost dissolved. Well, I lost my train of thought. Where was I? Oh yeah, so yes, your dentist is right. So sugar is going to cause tooth decay because those things that are going to be in your mouth are going to eat that sugar, and when they eat that sugar, they are going to produce an acid. It's the same reason, I've talked about this before, why sourdough is acidic. It's why it's got that sour taste, is because there's acid in it because little tiny things are eating the sugars in it. But that's happening inside your mouth. So when you eat sugar, I hope I'm not scaring too many people by saying this, because this is definitely what happens. When you eat sugar, there are teeny tiny little things living in your mouth that are going to eat that sugar. That's why it's a good idea to not eat too much sugar and to definitely brush your teeth. All right, we are getting there. So what else do you notice about all the ingredients I put in here? I think I asked the same question the last time I made a candy type thing, specifically when I made the broken glass candy. So, same answer to the question as that. You might have noticed that all of your ingredients are either white or clear. So, when you notice you're stirring this, it's going to look kind of clear or maybe a milky white. And that's good. You don't want it to change color yet. Eventually it will, but not yet. All right. So anyway, I was talking about Elizabethan England. So when I say Elizabethan England, does anybody have any idea what I mean by that? I guess that'd be a good idea to say what that is. So, anybody know? All right. So just like when we say a phrase like Victorian England, does anybody know what Victorian England is? All right, so you might have heard that one more than Elizabethan. So Victorian England, you might be more familiar with because it wasn't that long ago. Well, wasn't nearly as long ago as Elizabethan England. So Victorian England is called that because that's when Queen Victoria was in power. So can you guess why it's called Elizabethan England? Yeah, that's when Elizabeth was in power, Elizabeth I. So, all right, it's starting to bubble. We're doing good, we're doing good. So anyway, in Elizabethan England, that's when people wore those silly collars and frills and stuff like that. But sugar was a rare thing, and it cost a lot of money. So if you could get it, it meant you were rich. But just like today, when you ate too much sugar, it rotted your teeth. And especially back then, they weren't used to having that problem, so they didn't really brush their teeth much. But when they started having this, it could rot your teeth and turn them black. But because sugar was so expensive, some people thought, wow, look at them. Their teeth are rotting and falling out of their head. They must be rich. So of course, other people wanted to look like they could afford sugar. So what did poor people do to make themselves look like they could afford sugar? So this is true. They would put soot from a fire on their teeth to make it look like their teeth were rotted. Yes, people are weird. No matter what time period you're in. All right, so here we go. So I'm just gonna stir this too. You shouldn't feel any grains. There might be some on the side, but in your main mixture, it shouldn't be, and it should be kind of clear, looking a little bit like if you ever go down to the creek and you see the water churning. If it happens to be pretty clear water, but it's churning up and it's got those kind of foamy bubbles, that's what it should look like right now. All right, so now it's starting to bubble. So I'm gonna get my candy thermometer. And at this point, we're gonna stop stirring. I know that's hard. I always feel like I overstir on the things that tell me to not stir too much. So this one telling me to not stir at all, well, that might be a challenge. Let's see if I can position this better. Perfect. Okay, great. So, where are we at right here? Yep, let's get that right in the mix. So right now I'm at 208 degrees. We need to get this all the way up to 300 degrees. That's why it's very important. Do not put your hands in this when it's boiling. So if you put your hands in boiling water, it's going to hurt quite a bit and you're going to get a burn on it. But you're probably only going to get a mild second-degree burn. You put your hand in this. Have you ever noticed what happens when you eat something really sugary? Well, a lot of things happen, but what happens to your hands? All right, so if you eat something sticky and sugary, it sticks to your hands. Well, that's exactly what's going to happen to this too. So not only is it boiling and the same temperature it would be if it was water, but if you put your hand in this, it's also going to stick to it, and it's going to take way longer for it to come off of your hand. So you're actually going to get quite a bad burn. So safety first with this. Make sure you don't do that. I'm sure nobody will, but it's also going to be important not to spill this or to spill this or splatter it. Okay. Oh, the temperature actually dropped. I wonder if I had it on the bottom of the pan. I think I'm... Oh, that's because it started really boiling in earnest. So I probably got some air pockets in there. There we go. Now it jumped back up. All right. So we're just going to leave this until it gets to 300 degrees. So make sure you've got your baking soda ready because we're going to be adding that into that. So that will keep going. I'm going to read my directions a little bit here. So it should still be clear even once we get up to 300 degrees. So once it does, then we're going to put in our baking soda. All right, so I know most of you have probably used baking soda for something, or at least seen it used for something. So does anybody remember what baking soda is? All right, so I said sodium bicarbonate. So that's one sodium, what is that? One sodium for every 2 carbon atoms. So it's sodium and carbon. And isn't it interesting how when you rearrange these atoms to form molecules, what kind of interesting things they'll do? Because what does baking soda do? What is it known for? All right, that is right. When you put it into things, it bubbles, especially if you put it into something acidic. Like the classic one is baking soda and vinegar. So what will happen when we put this into this candy? What do you think? Well, let's see if you're right. All right, so what are we at now? 222 degrees. So it's going well. So at this point, your mixture should be bubbling quite a bit. It should be a very active boil. And it still should look a little bit off clear. Sort of like an old glass window, maybe. So if you were to wait for this to reach 300 degrees and then just pour it directly without adding the baking soda, what would happen to it? Well, it would end up being pretty similar. In fact, it might be the same recipe, or at least just about, as the candy glass that we made. And it's going to just be a flat and clear candy. But we're going to be adding this baking soda, and that is going to change things. So I love making candy. I think it is so fun. So let's talk about the other big thing in this. So we've got our ingredients, but there's one big thing we can't ignore in this, and that's heat. The heat is changing the chemical structure of this. Because if we were to just add all these things together and not heat them up, well, you just have kind of a big old lumpy pile of different kinds of sugars and then baking soda. That wouldn't really be very interesting. But when we add the heat, it's going to break apart the bonds that those chemicals have and then restructure them. That's really what heating things does. So remember that heat is the same thing as energy. So whenever you're heating something up, you're adding energy to it. And energy really means how fast the atoms and the molecules are moving. So all of those particles, those teeny tiny microscopic particles, the hotter something is, the faster they're moving in here. That's why things change state. So there's probably a little bit that's evaporating from here, mostly the water in that. And so that is going to be turning from a liquid into a gas. And that's why when you heat something up, it turns into a gas. It's because the particles are moving really fast and they no longer have that strong bond that's holding them together. Whereas if I were to freeze that water and turn it into a solid, when I freeze it, it makes it go slower. Sort of like how if you try to go on a run on a cold day, you might feel like you're running way slower than you would if it was a nice warm temperature. It's kind of like the same thing for any of these subatomic things. So the colder things are, the slower they go. The hotter things are, the faster they go. Where are we at? All right, it's slowly heating up. It's getting there. All right. We're doing good here. We're doing good. All right. right, so just a word. I think we'll probably be doing more of these science explosions when school starts again next year. So if you have any topics you would like to see, then definitely let me know. At this point, we will probably be doing them in person. It's always hard to say with all this weirdness going on. I would definitely like to. We'll probably be keeping all of these online though, so you can always come back and watch these videos later. All right, starting to get there. All right. So check on your candy every little bit. Make sure that it's still going all right. And making sure that the thermometer is all the way in. All right, 230 and climbing. So we're good. That's what I like to see. Is it going up in temperature now? All right, so if you wanted, you could also add some flavorings to this. I would recommend adding them at the same time that you add the baking soda. Otherwise, it might change the chemical composition of them. So if you wanted, there's a few things you could add. We've actually got some flavoring here too. Let's see, what do we have? We have vanilla, we have strawberry, and we have lemon. What do you think would be good in this? I think lemon would probably be good in this. It'd be nice to have a nice lemon candy. But if you're wanting to do this traditional, you will not put any flavoring. So if you want to just taste this, so the candy that we are making is called Honeycomb. And if you want, you can also make it with honey instead of your corn syrup. So just sub it out 1 for 1. A lot of recipes will call for that, but even though it's called honeycomb, you don't need to actually use honey to make it. It's called honeycomb for a completely different reason. So, anybody have a guess of why it's called honeycomb? Does it have anything to do with that baking soda that we're using? All right, it's getting there. My hot plate tends to run a little cold, so I'm going to turn it up just a little bit. All right, so remember, don't stir. I just have my spatula here to hold my thermometer in place so it doesn't fall in. All right, let's see, it's getting there. All right, so I think I'm going to pause the video and keep it cooking for just a little bit so that you don't just have to watch me keep looking at the food. So I'll see you in just a few minutes. Okay, I am back here. So I didn't want to have to make you wait while I just stood here watching it. So it's been a few minutes. It is just a few degrees away from this. So what do you notice right now? I'm at 298, so just a couple more degrees to go. What do you notice about this? What does it smell like? What does it look like? How is that different from when you started? All right, there we go. That is 300. So I'm going to carefully get my thermometer out of there. And now we're going to dump this in, and then we're going to stir it, but not over stirring it, and we don't need the heat on anymore. So I'm going to put that in, and then I will stir it until it's all mixed in. So what do you notice happening? You can't see mine. So you just want it to be barely stirred in. So stir it carefully and not too much. What does it look like to you? What are you noticing? So if anybody's just watching this and not following along, it has become quite bubbly in here, and you'll see that when I pour it out. So you don't want there to be any chunks of it, but you also don't want it to be over mixed. And now, what else do you notice? Besides it being bubbly, what else do you notice about this mix? Right away, I notice it's a completely different color. All right, so I think that's good. Now we're gonna put it on our pan, or on our sheet right here. Glurp, glurp, glurp. All right, you're gonna want to try to scrape it all out of there. Don't want to waste any. Get all that delicious candy out. So I didn't add any food coloring, remember, but you certainly, or sorry, not food coloring, flavoring, but you certainly can if you want to. I don't think that there's any reason to add food coloring to this because I think it is honestly a really pretty golden color. And I think adding anything else would kind of spoil that. But it's your candy. You can add whatever coloring you like. So, all right, it's already starting to cool. Perfect, there we go. Yep, it's already starting to get cold on there. So I'm gonna let that sit for just a minute. So if you want help cleaning that up, I'd say let it cool for a few minutes, but then while it's still warm, you can add some warm water in it and it's gonna be a lot easier to get that sugar out. So now you can see what's stuck on here has started to form hard parts. But this, notice it is nice and fluffy, and that is the baking soda in there. So the baking soda, that sodium bicarbonate, is reacting with that, and it's causing it to bubble up in there. And because it's a thick structure like this, you get the sugar and you also get the corn syrup, which are very viscous, which means they flow slowly. It's holding those bubbles in there, so it's not going to settle. You'll also notice it's holding its shape pretty well on here. It's not spreading out too much. So you don't want to eat this right away. This is a hard candy, so you're going to want to let this sit, I'd say, for at least an hour, and then you're going to break it up into pieces, and when you break it apart, it's going to look really cool, and you will see why they call it honeycomb. So thank you everyone so much for joining me for another installment of Science Explosion. It is so nice to see you all here, even though I can't really see you. So I hope you're also going to come and join me at our summer library program and hopefully for our after school activities in the next year as well. So thank you everyone so much for joining me. Bye.